It's wonderful to see some new faces. Thrilled to have you here. Welcome to Leaders Link. These are live stream conversations with leaders who have got something special to share about some of the big questions in the world today. And Jacqueline is most definitely one of those people. For any of you who don't know me, my name's Lindsay Levin. I'm the founder of Leaders Quest. And our focus is on helping leaders and companies align profit and purpose and do that in a way that is inclusive of everybody in the world and takes care of our planet. And I cannot think of a better person to be having a conversation with, given that remit, than Jacqueline. So Jacqueline, really, really happy to have you with us today. Thanks very much for making time. Jacqueline, we're mainly going to talk about her book, her second book, which was published just yesterday here in the States, very bravely and boldly titled Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. It's a wonderful book. I can say I've really, really loved reading it. One of my first actions is going to be to send a copy to all of my team. So colleagues who are on the line, you'll be receiving a copy because I think it's so apt for the moment that we're in and for many of the things that we're all working on. But for those of you who don't know Jacqueline, she's an amazing entrepreneur, founder of Acumen back in 2001. She left Wall Street to set up an organization working on impact investing. She's, I would say, the originator really in that space, leading a thought leader and person of tremendous action in the impact investing space. As at today, I think if I've got my numbers right, you've invested in over 130 social enterprises, social enterprises and impacted 260 odd million people with the products that you provide. We'll hear a little bit more about that. So huge reach. This is your second book, Jacqueline. You touch many different facets of life. You spend time all over the world, and we're really, really happy to have you here.
Thanks. It's an honor to be with you, I will say, for everything that you've built. Well,
thank you. Thanks. So I want to focus on the book, but before we do that, I'd love to just get a sense of what's going on for you in Acumen. When I spoke to you last week, you said something to the effect of, we haven't slowed down a jot. No surprise to those of you who know Jacqueline. And you're busy innovating. And I think seeing this as an opportunity to really change some things for the positive in the organization. So give us just one or two insights into that, because I think pretty much everybody on the line is trying to find that spirit in themselves, in their own work today. So how are you innovating? What's going on?
Right. Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah. And to everyone, I'm thinking about everyone because this is such an extraordinary time for what we're all going through. But Lindsay, as you know, everything at Acumen is grounded first and foremost in values. So one of the core values to Acumen is moral imagination. And I start there because the moral imagination for us is the humility to see the world as it is and the audacity to imagine what it could be. So when we're looking at this crisis, everybody was at shelter at home. We've got companies around the world, including in the United States. We knew that people were undergoing different circumstances. And remember, our companies, our people, are entrepreneurs who are serving people who make $2, $3, maybe $4 a day. So they're dealing with extremely vulnerable populations. We knew immediately that the situation that we had to deal with was keeping our company stable so that we could protect tens of thousands of jobs. Because we had a choice. We could give people relief money, or we could keep them in jobs and they could continue to make that income. And so we started 3 different emergency facilities that would allow our companies to take grants from Acumen really for the first time to cover their operations so that they could continue into the future. And we preferenced those that were retooling even as they were dealing with crisis for the future. The second thing that we did was what all of you are doing, which is looking at how we digitize just about everything. And so when we launched the book yesterday, we also launched Acumen Academy as the World School for Social Change. And we had been doing online education for change makers. We're really taking that to another level now, moving our in-person fellowship programs that are focused on leaders that are about 700 strong. Most of that is being now done online as well. So we're learning a lot about how you cultivate community when you don't have that in-person presence. And then we had to reimagine how you launch a book. And then finally, we're the largest off-grid investor for energy access for the poor in the world. And so we catalyzed what I hope will be a $100 million bridge financing fund for other Acumen companies and others. We won't run it, but we felt that as a leader in that field, it was important for us to lead that movement. And so we've been busy.
Well, amazing. I mean, just to give people an insight into one of the businesses that you've backed on this off-grid thing, give people a sense of how many homes you reach through the businesses that you've backed there.
So the way Acumen works and patient capital works, and why we have concluded, and this goes into the book, that character is more important than anything, is a company called D-Light. Two guys with a solar torch and a dream that they'll eradicate kerosene when 1.5 billion people had no access, back in 2007. We invested in these guys at the prototype stage. We've stayed with them now 12 years, bringing different kinds of capital to them along the way, as well as bringing the kind of talent that they needed so that they could learn what low-income people really valued and could afford, and build solutions for them so that you could essentially disaggregate, not depend on a big, expensive, centralized grid, which is not appropriate for our interdependent, climate fragile world anyway. And that single company today has brought light and electricity now to 100 million people around the world, and has really set the standard, and hopefully is starting to convince governments that we need more of these networked systems that allow for more individual household control of their lives, but are connected to each other. It's a real metaphor for what we need to build in every sector.
Wonderful, wonderful. So the title, Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. I said earlier, I think it's a brave and brilliant title. What do you mean by a moral revolution?
So you can imagine that my publisher decidedly did not want to make this the title of the book. And it's interesting because now that we're in the coronavirus, it seems like it's a natural to a lot of people. I think that we've realized what we've all known for many, many years, that our institutions and our systems haven't been working. They've run their course. They were designed for a different world where we live more separately. In an interdependent world, we have to reimagine new ones that take into account the vulnerable, that take into account climate, everything that is being brought into stark relief. But we don't have a blueprint for doing that. And so one of the things that you and Wendy both do so brilliantly, and I've also come to the conclusion of, is that we can create and use different tools of capitalism, socialism, any kind of ism. But the only way that we actually build an entirely new system is to build our internal character. So the revolution cannot come from moral authority from on high, nor is it entirely grassroots up, but it has to come from each of us. And so after 35 years of doing this work, coming to my conclusion that we need a new set of operating principles. While they may sound poetic, so have I also learned that the real principles of leadership are not the soft skills that I was raised to believe they were. They're the hard skills. They're the skills of deep listening, of holding opposite truths in tension, of understanding our identity not as a way of dividing ourselves from each other, but as a way of connecting to those who are different from us. We have to learn how to partner with private sector, government, etc. And we don't teach any of that. And that was then what I said, like, write down everything you've learned from these thousands of people you've accompanied. And that's how we came up with Manifesto for a Moral Revolution.
Wonderful. Can everybody make sure they're on mute? There's a little bit of background noise going on. So, I mean, those principles, I loved all the chapters. And as I said to you, I think in a note last night, I shed a few tears. I laughed a lot. I felt occasionally that I was looking in the mirror. My favorite chapter is the one called The Ocean in the Drop. And it's really about identity. So bring that to life for us a little bit. What do you mean by identity, and how have you thought about that in a many-layered way?
Thanks, Lindsay. Yeah, I think that the entrepreneurs of today and the future have to understand how to navigate the identity. And the irony is that in this time when we're so interconnected, so are we seeing just a poisonous rise in identity politics. And one thing I think we don't keep in mind enough, when we think of identity, it's that I am a this or I am a that, or more precisely, you're a that. And I've been deeply influenced by the French-Lebanese writer, philosopher, Amin Malouf, who talks about identity a little bit like some of the great poets, Sufi poets, that we're a multitude of identities, that I may be an American white woman, New Yorker, but so am I, vegetarian with an MBA who loves poetry. And if I allow myself that composite understanding, I have then a whole suite of layers with which I can connect to another person. And if I have the curiosity to understand who that person is, I will find a way of connecting rather than deciding they're one thing. But the second thing he talks about is a hierarchy of our different identities. And so when one part of us is threatened, you're an American, that goes to the top. And even if that is not what I always lead with, if suddenly I'm told how stupid, greedy, awful Americans are, I become very American. When I'm going through customs in the United States and they look at all of my Pakistani passports and ask me, what am I doing? I am a global citizen. And that is what we do as human beings. And so if we can also understand that as a tool, maybe we would be a lot better at bridging difference.
Yeah, no, I was struck by how, I think you write very insightfully about that. Just share a little bit of how you've seen people move through those layers. You know, for those of us on this call thinking about our own growth and wisdom, and also many people here in different ways of working to try to expand not only their own sort of circle of compassion, but that of those around them. How do you see people growing through life in that way? And what are some of the means that are most effective to help expand our sense of who we are and how we relate and identify?
With our fellows, we do a number of exercises, but one is we have them, quick, take out a piece of paper. We make them write down all of your multiple identities, and then we go around the room with them. And I'll say, all right, how many people put gender? Man, woman? How many people talked about gender? And typically, most of the women will write their women and very few of the men. So that gives us a real opportunity to talk about the role of privilege and identities we might take for granted, so that we can also talk about not how we see ourselves, but how others may perceive us, and hear how others are being perceived from outside. But also the skill set of polarities, or holding opposites in tension. Something I also think that we should teach in every school to every entrepreneur, that, and we see it right now with COVID crisis, that the way we're watching our leaders have very difficult conversations is to dig into what they know is right, assuming that if they are right, it must mean the other side is wrong. And so it's left, right, build a wall versus open borders, health, livelihood. And if instead of just going deeper, deeper, deeper into our side, we could start by acknowledging a truth or even a partial truth in what the other side stands for, we might open up a space where they would then acknowledge a truth or a partial truth in what we say. One of my great and favorite quotes is from the Sufi poet Rumi, who says, beyond wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there. So many of the solutions that we are going to find as a world, and we're more open to right now in this time of crisis, lie not in compromise between the truths, but almost in another place. And I almost feel when it comes to politics right now, I don't know anyone who's purely left or purely right. But we don't have leaders with the humility and the vulnerability
And somebody on, oh, good, gone. Okay,
to
go.
hold that and to hold that space for us so that we can actually have more pragmatic conversations, not about the way we get somewhere, but how we actually solve a problem together.
So one can only lead in this kind of space if you're willing to be vulnerable. Otherwise it's preaching, and that's the very last thing you've done with this book. I think part of the gift of it is you've told a bold story, and you've done it by being vulnerable and really showing up. And I've seen you over the years just repeatedly stand up and be willing to be vulnerable in order to lead and be effective. And I guess that's something that in different ways we all struggle with. Can you speak a little bit? Where does that capacity come from in you? This willingness to stand up in the full force of whatever gale is coming and take a chance.
You know, it's so funny, Lindsay, because a number of people are asking me this lately, and my first response is not knowing exactly what the answer is to that. I've always felt my whole life that I had a bull and a dove that kind of swirled around inside of me. And the bull was certain, I'm certainly stubborn and kind of held what was right. And maybe that came from the sides of me that were raised by a military, religious, immigrant family during a time of duty, patriotism, and more religious communities. And that as I got, and I was a girl. I was an outsider in that way, that I wanted desperately to change the world my whole life. But I never had the kind of certainty that so many of the authority figures had around me. I grew up in a time where experts held everything. And a lot of their expert opinions made no sense to me. And so I think somehow letting that bull and that dove run together, I got to follow the curiosity that I had. And it wasn't like I was this fierce crusader, but I did have a sense of right and wrong. I did have real confidence in my ability to do math and to, get good grades. And maybe that had to do with feeling like I was an outsider who moved every year. I was thinking about, early moments. And when I worked, my first job on Wall Street was to analyze the creditworthiness of Chase Manhattan Bank's loan portfolio during a time of a massive financial crisis. And I was the one that was always getting critiqued for wearing flowy skirts and not dressing like a 1980s banker with essentially like a man. And yet I was also the one that would ask the stupid questions, or questions that my bosses would tell me were naive, idealistic, stupid. And there was this one time in Switzerland where I had analyzed this one bank, and I just thought from the numbers that it was probably going to fail. And the experts kept telling me that I didn't understand Swiss bankers. I didn't understand Swiss banking. And my boss threatened to fire me because I refused to capitulate and just pass this as a solid loan. And I actually put it on this watch list, which meant it got raised to the top of the bank. And then luck intervened, not for the bank, but for me. The bank failed. And I went literally from being kind of the goat in my boss's eyes to being a star. And so I learned very young that I was the exact same person in the next week as I was in the previous week. And even if I was trembling and crying the night before, and I could just say the truth, that I would at least be able to live with myself. And that somehow has never changed. And what I tell young people all the time is just have courage. don't get so certain, because if we were so certain we would have solved these damn problems, and you know, if you're focusing on poverty, I haven't seen that happen in my lifetime, not yet. And if you keep that spirit of inquiry and uncertainty, but you have a North Star that is like steel, you're much more likely to solve the problems.
Wonderful. Now, there's also a chapter called Embrace the Beautiful Struggle, which in my reading at least is about beauty and struggle, amongst other things. Beauty, I know, is really important to you, and I think it means certain things beyond the superficial, a lot beyond the superficial to you. Share a little bit about what sustains you. How do you keep your energy going? How do you deal with the low points? And again, something which I know resonates for everybody in different ways as we manage not only through this crisis, but through many of the challenging things that we're all working on.
Thanks. Yeah, Lindsay, the phrase beautiful struggle actually came from Martin Luther King, who used it in '68 when he talked about the long and bitter but beautiful struggle of rights and justice. And so for me, I think so often when we talk about social change and those people that pursue lives of change, we forget to talk about the kind of the magic of the beauty that is there all along the way, whether it's the beauty that makes itself manifest in villages and in the way that the lowest income communities adorn their pots and their walls and their textiles, and in discovering that, I realized that there was this texture of our shared humanity that deeply sustained me. In fact, there's almost no place I'm happier than when I'm in a slum community or a village community and I'm seeing the pride that people have in who they are, what they can and want to offer. And so it's become very clear to me that beauty in and of itself is something that sustains. But I really appreciate, Lindsay, that you said it's not just the physical beauty. I think there's deep beauty in paying attention, in showing up. For me, I've also worked with many religious communities and seen beauty in the rituals that people practice every day. We have a young woman on our team who's Jane, and she and her grandmother would feed the birds every morning before the day to remind themselves of our interconnectedness to all living things. And so I've integrated some practices to remind me of why I do this work. And it's not just poetry or which I start every morning with, but going on runs just to remember the beauty that's around me in the world, even when I've been kicked in the head so many times I don't want to get out of bed. And I would say the beauty of self-forgiveness, that sometimes we forget, and I think this is really true right now, that, you know, I feel like I've practiced a lot of courage in my life. Sometimes getting out of bed can count. Of practicing that courage, and when you really mess up, seeing a grace and not just forgiving people around you, but yourself.
Thank you. Wonderful. So I want to give people a chance to ask some questions. Sophia's going to manage that. We'll collect 3 or 4 questions in a gathering, Jacqueline, and then pass back to you. So Sophia, perhaps you'd share with people what they need to do.
So we're going to open up for questions using the raise hand function. So you should find it in the bar in the bottom of your Zoom window. And if you don't see it, just click on the participant icon and the list is going to open on your right, and you will find the raise hand button in the raise hand icon in the bottom. Once I call your name, just please unmute yourself. So Nicola, I see you raising your hand if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
Wonderful, thanks very much. Nicola Reindorf from Crisis Action, building coalitions to protect people from war. Jacqueline, I loved what you said, particularly thinking about bulls and doves and uncertainty and doubt. And one of the things that I've been really grappling with because of my personal journey about grappling with self-doubt, I'm realizing that I have always seen it as doubtfulness, as a disqualification for leadership. And yet what I've realized is actually what the world is telling us is it's a source of power, or it can be a source of power. And you spoke so compellingly of that sense of don't be so certain. And I think we're seeing something in this moment of COVID, of how people deal with uncertainty. And I wonder if this resonates for you, of this being a moment where we need to know and understand how to harness the power of doubt, what we don't understand, what we don't know, the voices we don't hear, the things we need to be curious about. And I think under this, it also just strikes me, one of the things we've been grappling with is this is about, for me, it was partly, I think, about associations of leadership and certainty and men, and therefore the flip side, leadership, so doubtfulness, women, and not being fit to lead. And so how we unpack not male and female as leaders, but notions of masculinity and femininity, so that we can actually better embrace both aspects, as you described, steel, the North Star of certainty, and yet actually also that sense of being comfortable in a doubtful space. Does that resonate for you?
Oh, it resonates so deeply, and it's so lovely, Nicola, that I can see Wendy's face and right on your left, and Lindsay's face right above you, because I think if you'd ask any of us, that it is that taking a step and not knowing what the next step is, and letting the work teach you what that next step is, not the plan. And I think that
Alexa, turn off.
Oh, yes, no problem. All the family members, right? This is just real. That's cool.
It's just real. I think that, and I really appreciate that you said that it's not women and men, but we have trained our boys to be more certain in terms of what was expected of them, and our girls, you know, I remember going to business school and the dean said, women don't give putts. And I said, what does that mean? And it's like, well, men, they know what they're doing. They know how to play. So they're kind of like, I'll give you that putt. But women aren't sure. So if the rules are there, we don't always break the rules. But some of us, when we know the rules don't work, we don't know what the new rules should be, but we are willing to go there. I think Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand stands as the kind of moral leader that you are speaking about right now, in that she embodies the masculine and the feminine. And when you look at those the mosque killings, that she was not just a softie. She had that respect and that sense of just showing up and veiling, and yet she was like, I'm going to take this guy down. I'm going to take the guns back. So you had this model for boys and for girls and everyone in between, that we can lead in a different way. So yes, I think we need seekers and less people who are certain. Thank you for that question.
Thank you. Sophia, I've got somebody I want to pick up from the group chat, but any others that you want to flag? Anybody else raising their hands? Please do go for it if you want to, anybody.
So no one else is raising their hand right now.
So I'm going to, Beth has, just before we go to Beth, or actually let's go to Beth, and then I've got another question I want to pop in from somebody on the chat. So Beth, go for it.
Hi, thank you so much, Jacqueline. It was wonderful to hear your story, more about your book, and I was really struck by the anecdote about yourself as a young banker and having this really, strong sense that the Swiss bank, wasn't going to make it, and hearing a lot of people telling you were wrong. And I'm really curious about, because I am so in agreement with you about this, we need less certainty, but then sometimes there is just a right thing or something we know to be true. So like, how have you navigated that balance? And the other thing I'm noting is like often the situations where our integrity and values are put to the test are these pressure cooker situations. And now we're in this global pressure cooker where many of us are experiencing that at the same time. And it's often in retrospect that we realize where we did well and where we didn't. And so I'd be curious anything you have to say about like what's the proactive approach or how you navigate that in the moment.
Beth, thank you for that. This is really where I think we have to flip what the hard skills and what the soft skills are. Because I really do believe that the hard skills are navigating this uncertainty from a place of values in a pressure cooker when we have lived and all grown up in a system that has been defined by money, power, and fame. And so when you think about, we don't trust the leaders of our institutions, not our corporations, not our governments, not our nonprofit leaders. And when you think about it, so many of our leaders have become leaders because they've had to learn to play the system. And that system has rewarded them for making more profit for the shareholder, et cetera. And I see this in the companies in which we invest. As they get more traditional investors, the investors will push them towards more profitability, even if it means leaving the poor. Experience I'll never forget. So I wasn't a young woman. I'm now in my 50s. And Acumen was being considered for a $10 million investment from a major development finance institution. And I was asked to fly to this country to have a conversation about whether we were getting the investment or not. And the decision had already been made, which was no. But the person felt that since our work was really important in building companies to the point where real investors could invest, she wanted to honor me, which I found fascinating, since I had to fly to another country to hear this. And when I pushed her on why, she said, look, Jacqueline, we love the work that you're doing, but you're not real investors. Because when the pressure's on and the company is in trouble, we worry that particularly with you on the investment committee, you will side with the poor and not with your shareholders. And I was like, well, isn't your mandate poverty? And she's like, no, but you don't understand. We're real investors. And so it was a real moment for me of like, wait a minute. What if real investors only care about shareholders to the exclusion of the earth and the poor? Then all this talk about stakeholder models is meaningless. We need to redefine what investing is. We need to redefine our systems and move away from a place where we put profit at the center to one where we put our shared humanity and sustainability of the earth at the center. And we don't know how to do that. That, again, is that steel of the integrity and the moral compass that at least can help us make those trade-offs and be transparent in the way we make it. But even today, we have to make decisions at Acumen, and I know that all of you that are trying to live in this way have to make it, and it's why I think some of the most brave moral leaders of today are in corporations, which are less forgiving often, where we still look naive or idealistic or like we're not real to the outside world. Having brought services to 300 million people and moved $1 billion gives me a lot more confidence to at least be certain about the things that I know to be true. Mm-hmm. And that is that in this moment of history of the coronavirus, we have to redesign our systems that put the poor and the vulnerable at the center and the earth, and that we have the skills and the tools and the technologies to make that happen for a world that all of us can live in. We don't know exactly how to do it, but if we keep pretending that only the idealists and the naive ones and the do-gooders are the ones that are going to try to help those people, we're going to keep where we're going. We're going to be on the road that we're on. And that is where I feel this great strength in me, but I don't ever want to give up the uncertainty and the vulnerability.
Thank you, Jacqueline. One more, I've got time for one more question. Megan, please go ahead.
Go ahead. Hi, it's Eliana here. I've worked with Megan. We're friends. We're in confinement together. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. I just had a question. I personally struggle with the uncertainty in very complex situations where there are just too many factors to have a really certain decision there are many trade-offs in the decision that you're trying to make. And I think that you often have a gut feeling about something, and it's very difficult, I find, to honor the intuition or the gut in these very complex decisions where there are trade-offs, and you know that the decision to maybe let go of a partner or move some funds in a different direction and have real consequences for the lives of real people. And I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how do you honor that intuition or that gut, and how do you do that trade-off in those very, very complex situations where it's not black and white and it's very gray? Sorry, that's...
No, it's a great question. And again, this is where I think this probably one of the key skills that we have to develop, all of us as moral leaders, is to hold those tensions and sit with the discomfort. I don't want to be political at all, but we do have leaders right now who are leading only with their guts. And that's a really terrifying situation too. And so it's holding intuition and hard data and science in tension, but not ignoring your gut. There have been, an embarrassing number of times, it doesn't happen anymore, but at the beginning of Acumen, where particularly with young team members who really love spreadsheets and data that gives them a sense of certainty about an idea, would really forget about the character of the entrepreneur. And then I would meet the entrepreneur after we had already approved the investment, and I'd be like, this is going to go bad fast. And almost every time it did. And so I've really been thinking a lot about how do you teach. Intuition is what? It comes from pattern recognition. That's where we develop our intuition. So to give voice to it, but I would say to have a counterweight on the other side, to push back with the data and see then where together, this is where I think models of shared leadership are so important. I've got a president at Acumen that is deeply data-driven, deeply systems thinking oriented, and will give great breadth to my sense of intuition and this vision of where we need to go. And it's in the push and pull of it that I think gets us to the best decision. And I think I've had to learn how to make bad decisions and make those decisions that probably shouldn't have been made, the right decisions, or cut your losses and move. I think those are three of the big leadership lessons that have been super painful for me, because like you, I'm an intuition girl, and but I also have deep, deep respect for operations, systems, and data.
Jacqueline, I'm going to finish with it's a very big question, and you'll only be able to take a minute or two to answer, but on the chat from a friend, Stephen, and I know he's asking this question in a deep way. How do you forgive yourself? He doesn't just mean you. I mean, I think it applies to all of us. When if one really feels sometimes that pain or shame of having got something wrong, how do you forgive yourself? Could you just have a go at responding to that question?
Well, first of all, let me say it's not one of my great strengths. So it's something that I have to really work on. And it's probably something I'll be working on my whole life. There is a beautiful Jesuit practice that is about daily, that you do every day. You start your day with setting the intention for the day, and then you're supposed to do it several times a day. I try to do it in the morning and then in the evening. But to pause and see how you did, what you did well, what you learned from it, and then forgive yourself for what you didn't do well. In many ways, it's forgiving yourself for the small things might help you in time forgive yourselves for the bigger things. Remember, I started an institution, Lindsay, in Rwanda before the genocide. And so when I went back after genocide, I saw what a crisis of a magnitude I could never have imagined in my life could do to people who had to find a way to forgive themselves and each other, and saw enormous retribution and reclamation of spirit through work, through service, that there is great truth, as Brian Stevenson says, that we heal ourselves by healing others. I've also found that there's great truth in healing ourselves so that we can heal others. And so maybe again, it's another form of a polarity that we don't talk about enough, which is we have to be whole. This is about wholeness, and crisis is about wholeness, and that forgiving in service of forgiving others, in service of seeing others for their possibilities, not just their faults. This is a moment for that. And I wish I could be more eloquent, but
you've been wonderfully eloquent. Jacqueline, thank you. You've given us a fantastic 45 minutes. I know this has been a tonic for people, whether they're in their morning or the middle of the day or their evening. Really, really appreciate you sharing with us. You can buy the book, everybody, on Amazon. It's out now in the US, but I believe shipping elsewhere in the world. Manifesto for a Moral Revolution. I highly, highly recommend it. We'd love you to share this. The recording is available on our website. We'd love you to share your feedback on social media, #LeadersLink, so that you tag us. And thank you, everybody, for being here. Oh, yes.
Could I just make one plug? Because my team's been working so hard, but more than that, for anyone who's interested, we do have this sounds so funny, but we do have a deal in that for anyone who buys the book before May 26th, we've just launched on Acumen Academy a master course for the book, which might be useful for any young people you know or your teams. Which is normally costs a couple of $100, but it's like a 10-week or 11-week course that people get free if they buy the book. So
brilliant. And where do they go to find that?
Acumen Academy / Moral Revolution.
Brilliant. Okay, go do that, everybody. And join us for the next Leaders Link, 19th of May, Wednesday the 19th of May. 11 a.m. East Coast time. I'll be with Professor Rebecca Henderson from Harvard, who's also just got a book coming out, Reimagining Capitalism in a World on Fire, talking about just that. How do we, from a business perspective, reimagine capitalism to be fit for the future? So please join me then. And meanwhile, Jacqueline, wishing you the very, very best in the coming weeks with the book, and love to everybody who's here. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. And so wishing every single person here just all goodness. And the world needs you more than ever.